try not to breathe. Yeah, we're streaming live.
Got it.
We'll wait till people flood in. I got some people
streaming?
viewing. Yeah, we're streaming. Internet is unstable, it says.
Huh. It's odd.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd. Okay, we'll see what happens here. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Well, let's let this thing build up. Get some people in here. I just shared a few links on Facebook, and I figure why not do a show on the temple? You know, what's going on, Kevin? We're trying this out, man. I've got to play with my Mac and try and get this thing taken care of, brother. I can't get the audio for Jacob to come through using Zoom on my Mac. It's he speaks through my speakers, which are going to be picked up from my microphone. So I hope that helps. And let me know if everything's coming through clear. We'll get some people in here first. Okay. Now we're on live. Guys, we're going to let a few people come in, and then we're going to jump on this. I wanted to talk about a few things here at MythVision pertaining to the topic of Jesus predicting the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in the first century. And I got Jacob Berman with me, so we'll try and see if we can't get a couple people in here before we jump into the topic. And you guys can comment. Look, I want to hear your feedback as we talk about this subject. If there's something we're missing, critique. I'm an open book. If you know something I don't, that's what I'm about. I'm about trying to change my views as evidence pours in. I am not the most learned. I am not that learned at all. I don't know too much, but I know enough to have some red flags and see what you guys think. So that's what we're here for. I do see the comments coming up. Once again, Kevin Maxwell, what's up, brother? Boxer Fencer, what is going on? Welcome to the chat. And this is the first live stream MythVision podcast has done. And, of course, we have Jacob Berman joining us. So what's up, Jacob?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Can you guys hear Jacob okay? Give me a 1. Write 1 in the comments. If you guys are watching, go ahead and put it in the live chat and let me know by pressing 1 that you guys can hear me.
Can you hear me?
Wait for a few of those, and then we can jump into the topic.
Right.
Oh, I spelled something wrong. Rhett corrected me already. I said predicting instead of predicting. Look at my title. Awesome. Thank you, Rhett. If you're watching, you're a savior, my friend. All right. All right, so here we go. I got a 1. Audio's fine. Sounds good. Nice. I am just getting ready for school tomorrow, but I may watch. You sound okay. You're a bit laggy on the visuals. Jacob is a little quiet, but he sounds all right. Okay, that's to be expected, guys. We're going to get his audio fixed. I'm going to figure out a better way using software where anyone I bring on live will sound better. At this moment, everything he's saying through my output on my audio through my computer is going in through the microphone. So you guys are picking up what's going on through the microphone. What's going on, David? All right, Jacob, let's dig into this, man. I think it's important we discuss this because from my understanding, what helped me escape what I was once following so hard and so long in Christianity, my path took me toward eschatology. I started to see that there was predictions that had to happen. I started to take this position, and I mentioned this on my channel. Not many people who are in MythVision podcast are probably aware of full preterism or preterism, in depth. A lot of them aren't aware of that. Preterism is practically the belief that the end times, the end of the age, the end of the world it happened then in the first century. Now, of course, preteristic believers believe that Jesus kept his word and he returned at the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. They literally believe. James Stuart Russell, who wrote in the, I believe it was 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, wrote a book, The Parousia and the Cross, I believe it was. and he talked about how Jesus kept his word. He returned in that first century. He said not that generation would not pass away, right? There's this underlying theme throughout the context of the New Testament where the temple is going to come down. And Dr. Bart Ehrman, I brought this up on the last show and I had a few comments. I might get to actually reading those comments so you guys can keep up with this. But Dr. Bart Ehrman had made the statement to a Christian and the debate moderator that yes, he believed a guy named Jesus predicted the fall of the Jerusalem temple. Now, that seems pretty interesting. I was thinking to myself, what evidence do we have pre-70 AD to suppose something like that? The only place we could go to would be Josephus, unless you buy into the New Testament to being your evidence, right?
Yeah, the New Testament is filled with so many contradictions that it would be highly illogical to use the New Testament as a reliable source for a Jesus pre-temple destruction era predicting the temple's destruction in AD 70. That doesn't make any sense. But Josephus Flavius, of course, does say that there was a Jesus that predicted the temple's destruction, an eschatological preacher called Jesus Ben Ananus. And he says that he was killed by a stone launched from a catapult at the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. And it's kind of, what I find interesting is he was brought up to the procurator, I think it was procurator, but anyway, Albinus. And then Albinus released him saying that, oh, he's just a madman. And I believe he said something about continuing to preach for 7 years until finally being killed in AD 70 at the temple's destruction.
It's funny, Jacob, because there's a comment, I must get to it. I think it's important that we do mention the comment because, man, I love the discussion that goes on in the comment section. I don't interact as often. I'd be caught up all the time. Hey, guys, in case you're brand new in here and you're listening, Jacob's audio is going to be low because right now we're having software issues with getting his audio to come in through digitally. It's having to go in through the mic that I'm using, so just keep that in mind. Hopefully you guys can understand him clearly, and if you don't, I'll try and reiterate, but there is a delay on this live, so I might catch you 15 seconds later. All right, I am at MythVision Podcast. We dropped a video with Dr. Robert McNair Price, and I'm going over to our podcast we did yesterday, and I'm going to pause that so you guys aren't hearing audio, and I want to read a couple comments I thought was interesting, and maybe, just maybe, I am, for some reason, strawmanning or doing something wrong with Dr. Ehrman's position. And this is from a commenter, Ben Holman. You've strawmanned Ehrman's position on the temple prophecy. It's not as simple as the Bible says it. And guys, I have no emotional tie-ins, like, whatsoever. I could be totally corrected on this. It doesn't mean I'm going to, like, lose something or I'm going to freak out, okay? So, and this, I wish more scholars were like this. They get butthurt about opinions and positions, and they almost act like, a Baptist and a Catholic. It's like they have something they have to be right about or else. It's yeah, and it's like, come on, guys, let's get along and not, let's really try and figure out what's going on. But anyway, critics notice that along with the destruction prediction, there are hints that Jesus also predicted the temple being rebuilt. So we'll get into that for a second here. And this I'd like to see more sources on because there could be something here that I'm missing. At the same time, I'm going to use the very text that they're mainly using here to talk about him rebuilding a temple. All right. The sources try to offer excuses or apologetics for it. Things like he only said he would hypothetically be able to rebuild it, or he was speaking metaphorically about his body. But notice the persecutors at the trial accuse him of having said in Mark 14:58, 15:29, chapter 15, verse 29, and then John 2:19. And then, Gnostic Thomas 71, which I have not read. So we have multiple sources suspiciously protesting that Jesus never said he'd rebuilt it, which may mean the historical Jesus did predict he'd rebuilt it, and was wrong, since the prediction of rebuilding would be problematic after 70 AD. So this line of reasoning goes, it must come from before 70, and rebuilding presupposes the prophecy of destruction, hence they both circulated together prior to 70. Add to this the line of reasoning in L.A. or La E.P. Sanders that the temple incident was an enacted parable of the temple's destruction, along with a total plausibility of a normal man being able to predict such a thing. I mean, it wouldn't take Nostradamus to see a conflict with the Romans and revolutionary Jews on the horizon, and you have the recipe for someone like Ehrman to think it likely Jesus actually did predict it. A lot of people commented underneath that, and I actually like that he put that there, okay? And what I was saying, and tell me what you think of this, I would suspect that when they say stuff like, in this same context of not one stone will be left upon another, the predictions, the thread through the New Testament is, and I hate to say it, but it's what it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me it's blaming. It's blaming the institutionalized Jewish people of the first century, or at least the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, the political Israelites that are there in the first century, and it's blaming them throughout the theme of the New Testament, saying they got it wrong, and why you're going to weep, your children's children are going to weep. It's this prediction of all these things that are going to come, and damn it if they didn't all pretty much take place. But see, when you look at preterism, and you look at things like the end of the age, right, like Matthew 24, consider researching some of what the preterists say about this. The term is not the world, not talking about necessarily the entire planet, but it could be the age. Is there astrotheological significance to the age being spoken of, that an end was supposed to come in Matthew 24? All of it just seems to me like it's all building up to prove Jesus' prophecy came true, so to speak, if that makes sense. It's like if me and you are in the 90s and we are going to predict let's go way back. Let's go exactly 40 years, a full generation prior to the fall of the Twin Towers, okay?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, at the fall of the Twin Towers, a few years later, somehow we are made to fulfill these things that we predicted were going to take place, or someone predicted. That seems more likely with all the things we see in there. I don't know how we could come to the real position that, hey, this is something that was legitimately predicted. I'll shut up, but I wanted to add in that real quick is I see what he's saying. Why would they say, oh, he spoke of his body when he said, and I will rebuild it in 3 days? Oh, he spoke of his body. Now, how does that add weight to the argument that he predicted the destruction of the temple? I don't know how that would be, but am I missing something, Jacob?
No, you're not. My opinion, it's a very absurd argument, because what we need is another text outside of the New Testament talking about a Jesus in the AD 30s or earlier, supposedly predicting the temple's destruction. That doesn't exist. All we have is a Jesus in the AD 60s that supposedly is predicting the temple's destruction in the works of Josephus Flavius, and that's Jesus ben Ananus. Now, aside from that, that is all we have of somebody called Jesus predicting the temple's destruction. That's all we have.
Unless you use the New Testament, Gospels and...
Right. But I think it's pretty safe to say the New Testament is unreliable due to all the loads of contradictions with different accounts, differing events, contradictory descriptions of certain events. And the New Testament I don't think it can be taken seriously as its own source. We need something outside of it. And like I said, Josephus Flavius, all we have of him is a Jesus doing it in the AD 60s. Now, aside from that, about blaming the Jews for the temple's destruction, Josephus Flavius himself does that. He blames the Jews for starting the revolt. It's their fault. They got themselves in this situation. They should have surrendered. That's kind of what he says. I mean, that's pretty much what he says, really. And he says the Son of Man is the Emperor. Yeah, I mean, he's the Messiah. I'm about to say that he's the Messiah of the Old Testament, the Son of David, that the Jews are waiting for. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. That's he's saying that pretty much that God allowed Rome to do this to punish the Jews. It's their fault. They got themselves into this situation. Pretty much what the New Testament is saying. It's very similar.
Well, see, and this is where we're rabbit trailing, and I get into a little bit of conspiracy here. I mentioned this to Dr. Bob on phone call because we've been on the phone a lot lately, and I've been throwing things his way, and some of it he's like, I'd consider that too far, and some of it he says there could be something to it. And he does think, and it's just a hypothesis, there's no way to prove this, but he does think that it's possible that that Josephus is actively involved somehow. I mean, like Joseph of Arimathea, for example, and we've heard that from Joseph Atwell, right? I mean, this is a guy who a lot of people go, oh, I can't listen to anything he says, but yet Joseph Atwell is bringing a point that Dr. Bob, who's completely was against him, is considering a lot of this evidence and saying, well, I've chewed on it for some time, and there may be some validity to this, okay? Either way, it's conspiratorial, yet it can make sense. And we're just trying to make sense of the evidence here with the fall of Jerusalem. I feel as though the temple's destruction is the key to the Gospels. I just feel like there's a huge key here that is the climatic point it's trying to bring up. Here is the reason why this happened to you guys. The destruction of the Jerusalem temple, and let's give you missed your Messiah. They backdate something, whether he was created or really did exist. But to suppose even if a guy named Jesus did exist, actually predicted the fall of Jerusalem, what evidence are we using? Well, the gentleman who left the comments said, look at Mark 14, and let's look at it together, and I'll give you my opinion. I'll start with Mark 14. Let me write these down. And some of you guys could actually go to the video if you wanted. Okay, 58, and then 15:29. By the way, I want to do like verse by verse stuff at some point with some of these scholars as well, because I think it would be very interesting. Mark 14:58, right? Mark 14, verse 58. Okay, guys, I'm going from the ESV. This is the first thing Google popped up, so bear with me. We hear him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Now, I suspect I'm missing some context around it. I'll pull up the whole chapter, and I'll go around 58 just to look at that. Let's start with where it says Jesus before the council. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and scribes came together, and Peter and followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. He was sitting with guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say... And notice something, false witness, right? They heard him say I will destroy this temple that is made with hands. And in 3 days I will build another, okay, not made with hands. Yet even about their testimony did not agree. Now, mind you, if you're going to this source and you're looking at this as your source, or even let's go to other sources and we can pull up those Bible verses. Here it's very interesting that he says he will destroy this temple. I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands. That's like a divine type statement, right? Either he is prophesying as if God's speaking through him and it's Yahweh saying it, or what's going on here, right? To me, that's a little overkill than to suppose this was written after the fact. What's more likely? Was there murmur in the air that the temple would probably fall, and people were saying, look, this thing's probably going to fall? You have the nutcase named Jesus in the 60s, written by Josephus, who's up there going, let me tell you what, thus saith the Lord our God Almighty. Okay? He probably was saying some crazy stuff. And this could be where sources of this come from. I mean, Dr. Price mentioned this in the last show. This same Jesus was saying, woe to you, and woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, woe to you. Right. That's what Jesus says in the Gospels. But when we dig deeper, we also find other characteristics that maybe come from Josephus' autobiography with the 3 men who died, and you talk about that extensively in your research. What are your thoughts on that particular place? He would tear down the temple, and he would build another one not made with hands.
Sounds a bit mythological, trying to incorporate something that really happened on top of a prediction, and then claiming that a divine presence will rebuild the temple without using physical hands. It sounds like what happened here is that the gospel writers have taken Jesus ben Ananus and they combined him with another historical figure living in the AD 30s, and then they combined it with his prophecy about the temple being destroyed, and then combined it with a godly mentality that would rebuild the temple without physical hands. So at this point, that text right there can't be taken seriously because it's combining several elements.
I mean, to me, what it does to me, and this is just my opinion, I'm no scholar, but I would suspect that maybe there's some scholars out there who need to look into this. This would give the red flags for written posts, you know? Right. Not saying there weren't people who thought the thing may be destroyed. Right. There could have been that in the air. I mean, for crying out loud, Rome, they're not to be played with. You know what I'm saying? They're badasses. So let's just keep it real, right? I just suspect that this is obviously something written after the fact. And there's more to this text, in my opinion, than just the way that we viewed the historical approach. There seems to be a lot of allegory. It's hard to say exactly what's going on in all these texts in the New Testament. There's so much that's taking place. From my research, though, that it just more reason to say, hey guys, this was all constructed as a reason why the temple fell, rather than saying, here's elements building up to why the temple really did by a guy named Jesus. And I know this is just going back and forth, but what seems more probable? Do you think that they really took elements of a guy like this Jesus in Josephus and said, let me put that into a text after the destruction because this guy who sounded like a nutcase turned out to be right?
Yeah, they could have easily have done that. And because this looks like a historical figure that they could use his image and blend it in with their Jesus that they're trying to create in the Gospels. It would certainly go well. And as far as I can tell, the evidence leans towards that direction more than anything else that I've seen so far.
You're big on trying to find the historical roots of the New Testament. That's one of the reasons why you and me have had a lot of fun, on these shows. You're trying to find out who the Jesus was, why there were 2 crucifixions with 3 people. Right. Jesus, Bar Jonah, and then Jesus. Son of the Father, Jesus, and then you got Jesus. Trying to figure out the historical roots. And Dr. Ehrman is taking a historical approach, trying to figure out, okay, I could take that approach, that there was a guy named Jesus who existed, who did predict it, and that's what he was remembered by.
Right.
Who was he if the gospel narrative that he's using in terms of trying to suppose from Mark and other verses, within the Gospels, is placing this Jesus under Pontius Pilate? Could it be possible that Jesus under Pontius Pilate is also the same one in the 60s during the war?
Well, not if he was crucified in the 30s. Then he's already long dead before Jesus ben Ananus could do his protection.
Right. So who the hell are we talking about?
We're talking about obviously 2 different Jesuses.
Hey, I want to give a quick shout out to everybody in the comment section. Thanks for checking us out here in this live. This is our first live here at MythVision Podcast. We're going to get better. We've come a long way from where we were. I see you guys who've written things down. I appreciate the support and love you guys have brought to us. And, of course, we're going to keep bringing more stuff. I've got a lot more with Dr. Bob and a lot of other hosts and guests. I'm going to have some stuff on here you're probably not going to agree with. But just remember, the questions we're bringing are going to be interesting. They're going to be different. And that's what I think is what makes MythVision unique. All right. I just wanted to stop and say that for a second. Jacob, if Jesus died in the 30s, do you think this guy really existed in the 30s? Or do you think that they conglomerated a mixture of things from Josephus and possibly stuff from the 30s that might be relevant? Or, to make it real simple, I like to try and be simple. You tell me what you think. This 40-year generation thing, okay, that's so relevant to Moses, so relevant with typology, as Joseph Atwell has mentioned before. And other scholars have mentioned the typology of 40 years that are important. And we see a rewrite. I personally do. Talked to Dr. Bob about this. He's writing an article right now called Jesus, Joseph, and Osiris. And he does compare them in many ways. I hear a lot of people who are against dying and rising gods, like Christopher Hansen. We will be having him on the show at some point. He's going to be coming on, and he's not a big fan of dying and rising god themes being parallel to Jesus. But if Joseph looks like Osiris in the Hebrew ancient world, and Jesus looks like Joseph, could I be logically right in saying, hey, Jesus and Osiris have a lot in common?
Yeah, they could have repurposed it
Could
to
have.
serve a new myth.
And with that being said, if this is a rewrite and there's a 40-year theme, could backdating it to the 30s just play that purpose?
And the only efficient way to do that is they would have to use a historical figure that has a name that sounds like Jesus in the AD 30s. And the only one we do definitely find outside of the allegedly written Testimonium Flavianum that Josephus supposedly written, because there's a lot of controversy surrounding that text. Josephus does mention, as I pointed out several times before, someone called King Bazus, whom definitely died in AD 31 during the reign of Pontius Pilate. Now, he only died from old age. Josephus is very clear he died from old age. Now, that might not sound like Jesus yet, but when you read Jesus' name in Greek, it's Isus, and you have Bazus. It's very identical. So they could easily have thrown the story of Jesus ben Ananus into the 30s, mixed the ingredients of King Bazus' chronology, as well as the fact that the name sounded like, which is Jesus ben Ananus. In Greek, Jesus' name is Isus, and Isus is used commonly throughout Josephus' text. So it does have a strong synergy with Bazus.
Could be. I lost you for a second. Your audio's out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it could be one of the things that and there's so many ways, Dr. Bob talked about this on the last show. He's like, there's so many possibilities that it just becomes no one will know for sure. But it's fun. I like the mental gymnastics. I like to test my thinking. I personally think that there's two ways of looking at it. Jesus is a common name in the first century. Got it. I mean, like, top name used in the first century was a guy named Jesus, okay? Which obviously derives, if you're using Hebrew, from Joshua, okay? I think that there's a title in that name. I think that they used it theologically. I just have a hard time believing that that's just the common name and it was just being used because there's this literal guy and that's it. Not saying that it couldn't be possible. I mean, for crying out loud, I could be dead wrong about everything I've supposed when it comes to all this. But I have my hunch that when they title him that in the Gospels, they give a meaning to the name. His name shall be called Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
Right.
He has a purpose behind the name.
I do have a problem with the claim that Jesus is a common name in the first century AD. I find it odd that every single time we find a Jesus, they're all involved in the war.
Yeah.
One way or another. That's something that I got a problem with there. And its connection with Yeshua is very it's just kind of the linguistics there between Yeshua and Jesus aren't quite exact. Unless you try to say that, well, the hypocrisize form of Yeshua, which is Yeshu, has some kind of connection to Jesus if you pronounce it as Jesus in the Greek. But still, you still have a synergy there with Bazus even more at this point.
Right.
And he's the only guy with a name that sounds like Jesus that dies in the 1830s. That's all we got.
Okay, and I want your opinion on this. In the theme of what I've been looking at lately with Joseph and Jesus, going back to the Genesis account, when we look at Joseph, okay, he is obviously sold off just like Judas sells off Jesus. Here he's sold off by Judah, and then Benjamin comes and says, "Look, let's sell him off. Let's not actually kill him." But Judah had the idea, I believe. If you go back to Genesis 38, I believe it is
30 shekels of silver.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you find him in Egypt under Potiphar's house. Potiphar and Pontius Pilate seem to play a similar theme. Yes, their wives did different things in both accounts. One wife tried to molest Joseph, and the other one had a dream, right? Similar to like Pharaoh had a dream, and it just, this dream seems to be a similar theme from the Joseph story. Do you think that they may have purposely placed him in a Pontius Pilate period based off of this Old Testament story, whereas Potiphar was somebody important to the Pharaoh, whereas Pontius Pilate is also somebody important to the emperor, and both of them play a similar theme in terms of someone who's in governmental control that's part of the foreign army or foreign nation, just like Potiphar was not part of Israel. Potiphar was part of the foreign nation that the Israelite is in, just as Jesus is kind of part of this Roman era. And here we are dealing with a similar theme, and that might be the reason they put it under Pontius Pilate?
Absolutely. They can easily repurpose stories from the Old Testament and squeeze it in with the 1830s King Bazus, because, and Jesus Benedictus, because it would make it seem like it's historical, because you're taking attributes from the Old Testament and putting it into an 1830s background, adding names of different people that definitely existed around this fictionalized story, and the chronology being deliberately distorted and thrown back into the 30s.
Suppose you're wrong. Let's suppose you're wrong. I want to play devil's advocate for a second here, okay?
Sure.
You're dead wrong, Jacob, okay? And here's why. All right,
okay.
You're playing way too hard to try and say that this guy is fictionally made up, and it's just easier to just believe what it says to some extent and naturalize it. Okay, let's just make it natural. Get rid of the miracles. Get rid of that stuff. This guy named Jesus did live in the 30s, and he was crucified. All right. Why the hell they made this into a giant myth and let this thing progressively become what it was and made him into this giant person that he was never? Why is there not contemporary writings from the 30s that mention this guy's name at all? Or at least it seems like Josephus spent a little more time talking about Judas or Judah the Galilean than he did Jesus. Why is he not talked about enough? That's my I think you're wrong, Jacob, is what I'm saying, but answer me.
Okay, so the testimony of Gladianum is like one sentence about the Jesus dying during the reign of Pontius Pilate. It's just one sentence. The rest of the paragraphs really don't flow well with that sentence. And on top of that, the same thing goes for Tacitus. All we get is one sentence about Christus being crucified. That's it. Okay, so both of them tell us about the death, and that's it. No more information. That in itself is a very good argument for them being interpolated, either partially or completely. And so it's not looking very good, because Josephus spends a hell of a lot more time talking about King Bazus than he ever does about Jesus giving a one-liner sentence.
Right.
It looks like it was inserted a lot later by somebody that added it to the text as it was being copied over a long period of time. And also, I would like to point out that there is texts like the Gospel of Barnabas that actually says Jesus was not crucified. It was Judas that was crucified.
Well, rather than getting off into a side note on Judas being crucified, because that is a show in itself and speculation of why we would do that, And I think there's all sorts of wild gospels that do come up. But Barnabas, I think, is dated somewhere earlier than these other later versions that are kind of crazy. What? Okay. I had it said, all right, I had Tom Mill on I believe it's Tom Mill. I might be getting his name wrong. Tom Jump on the show. And Tom Jump is he believes there was a historical Jesus. He thinks that along similar lines as Ehrman in ways, not always the same, but regardless, he says this guy was an empty vessel. The reason why they used him is that he was empty enough that they could create him into what they wanted him to be. Of course, it's speculation, but would you really take someone who's an empty vessel who really existed, or does he appear more like a Frankenstein of many characters? I mean, that's kind of where my hunch is going. Is I think that he's a Frankenstein in a way.
I would say he's a Frankenstein character. The only thing that's stopping me is because the New Testament seems to be so zoomed in on the AD 30s one way or another. It keeps going back to the 30s over and over and over again. So it seems like what they did was they pretty much did a Frankenstein on King Bazus. They gave him
pull your mic away just a hair. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, they gave him the stories of all these other guys because they wanted I like to call it a chronological catalyst. They wanted to use somebody with a similar name to Jesus, which is or Isus, that is Bazus, to create the narrative around the fictionalized narrative.
So you suspect that they took a guy who had a similar name. That would be your proposition. Now, what do you think about this proposition?
Okay.
Daniel, right? Daniel's prediction. All right. Daniel seems to be used a lot by the New Testament authors. Okay. Do you think that the predicting date in which it's supposed to land is approximately in the 30s? Depending on your calculation, that they may have been utilizing that as a possible calculation to land in the 30s, and then also you have a 40-year period. Do you think there's something there in Daniel, or could I be right in saying, hey, this is just purposeful 40-year gap generation placement, rather than saying there was really a guy, you know?
Well, actually, I think it actually reinforces my point, because King Bazus is practically 40 years off from AD 70, so he actually fits in there perfectly.
Okay. So even regardless whether King Bazus is there or not, this 40-year theme, would you agree that might play its role? I mean, I would need to obviously get all the text to build up on this to try and make what I'm saying here make sense, but do you think Daniel plays a role? Daniel's prophecy, the 490, etc.
Because you also have the Daniel's 4 kingdoms. I think the 4 kingdoms. The Old Testament mentions something about the 4 kingdoms, and in the New Testament you have the 4 horsemen. I even compared Helios's 4 horses in the sun chariot and his son Phaethon scorching the earth, and then Zeus coming to strike Phaethon down, to both the 4 kingdoms and the 4 horsemen in the book of Revelation.
Right. No, and we need to do a show. I don't think you spend enough time on a show talking about that, but
we can do it. We could do a whole show about Helios and Phaethon. That would certainly be good.
Going back to the temple's destruction. This Jesus character that all this is taking place on is predicting. At the end of the day, is it your opinion, and I just straight up for anyone who just popped in, is it your opinion that this was written after the fact? And I know that they'll agree, even the people who say that there was a Jesus that may have existed saying that the destruction would come, they'll say there was a tradition of a guy named Jesus. If it's not the guy that Josephus is talking about, who would it be?
So I definitely think it was written after the fact. Now, when you asked me about who would it be, are you talking about which one of them would be Jesus primarily?
Yeah, if the Jesus that was going woe to Israel, woe to the the Pharisees, and the woe crazy Jesus according to Josephus, who was killed by a catapult at the war, if this is not based off him, who was it based off of? Who could predict? Who would even make that hunch?
Well, we don't got anybody else doing it with that name Jesus,
That we know.
especially.
Okay.
Right. It looks like I think the fact that he chose to record him in his text as being the one that predicted the temple shows that is evidence in itself that the gospel writers copied it from Jesus Benedictus, because Josephus was zooming on him as being the one that predicted it, because he didn't record anybody else doing it. So even if other people were predicting it, if we were to assume that, I think it's leans towards Jesus Benedictus purposely being the one chosen to be the guy that predicts it,
right,
in the Gospels.
I think Dr. Price said that even this Jesus was flogged and then released. Like the same way Jesus was flogged. And I don't know if it says he was flogged 39 stripes, but that would be funny.
It even resembles a Barabbas release too. And he is called Jesus Barabbas.
Yeah, Jesus, son of the Father. I mean, what do you do with this, right? I have to keep saying that is also the same reason that dating the Gospels, dating the New Testament, a lot of preterists use this stuff. Remember now, if you come from two different sides, right? If you're a believer in the book and you have the biased position of I believe, or you have the biased position of I just can't accept that that's the case, you have one or two options usually, and then there's the gray area. The gray area would be what I'm saying. Ehrman comes in and he says, look, I think there was a tradition where he may have said the temple was going to be destroyed. They embellished it. They enhanced it after it was really destroyed and made it into this, oh, he really did predict it. And that's where he takes that approach of like their fault or their Messiah actually died, but cognitive dissonance takes place. And for some reason, they really believed in the resurrection where they hallucinated or something happened. They couldn't let it go. They had to accept it and passed it on as if he was a risen one, etc. Then you have where the preterists come in and they say, hey, look, he kept his word. He's true. These gospels were written before the fact because Jesus' words are true, and what he prophesied had to happen because you can't have a false Messiah that you believe in if you're a Christian. And the preterists believe that Jesus did predict the temple's destruction, so the prediction is the case. And they saw the temple's destruction had to take place in terms of prediction before. So they date the Gospels like Christians do. Matthew 24 had to be written before, or else it wouldn't have been a prophecy. Why would Jesus say it if it wasn't a prophecy? It had to be a fulfillment of something to come, because that's how the narrative writes it. It writes it like it hasn't happened yet. Don't weep for me. Weep for your children and your children's children. Or Jesus says to his disciples, and he hadn't even been crucified yet, take up your cross and follow me. Why would you write something when it hasn't happened, like the gospel author has said that Jesus told his disciples, take up your cross and follow me, yet he was never even crucified yet? Why would you say that? You see where I'm going with why they wrote it after? Okay.
So, I think the reason why they wrote it that way is because they're starting out with Jesus Benedictus' prophecy and working their way up to AD 70. And what happens in AD 70 when he's killed? Then you have the crucifixion of three guys at the Kidron Valley that Josephus Flavius talks about in his Vita life. And he goes up to Titus. Says, these are my friends. Please let me take them down. And Titus orders them to do so immediately. Two of them died at the physician's hands. One lives. And then when I look at the name, Joseph, son of Matthias, or you could say Joseph Bar Matthias, Josephus Bar Matthias, it does sound a lot like Joseph of Arimathea. Yeah, Matthias. It's very similar. And that story also connects very well with the death of Jesus Benedictus happening at the same time, around the same time. So you're building it up from the start of his eschatological ministry up to his death in AD 70. So that's why the story has to flow like it hasn't happened yet, and then eventually get to where it did happen. So I think that in itself is evidence that this is a post AD 70 story, because it's writing it as they've known it to have happened.
Right. That's how it appears to me. I mean, just reiterate how did Jesus know to tell his disciples, take up your cross and follow me? He hadn't been crucified yet. The author had to have wrote it after at least after a crucifixion happened, whenever the hell that was. But utilizing the temple theme in with that same logic, I'm saying he knows that there's going to be earthquakes, famines, wars and rumors of wars, particular details that are described down to a T. It appears these elements were known after the war, right? Well, if they were known after the war, and they wrote this after the war, there's black or white or gray. Black or white is, let's go with white, the goody two-shoes, the believer, the biased one. They're saying this is evidence that this is fulfillment of real prophecy, that this is true. Believe in this text, believe in this book, believe in this way, the Christian way, etc. The black side would be like, guys, it's written out, and I kind of side with it, honestly, is this was written after. Here's elements. Here's elements to say, here's why I think this was written after. There is a gray area that can suspect, but to make an assertion that you really think there was this guy who actually did predict it, apart from that Jesus guy I keep going back to, that's a strong assumption in a debate with a Christian. I don't know if he took that stance because he didn't want to part ways completely, or if he really does think, hey, this is good reason to think there was this guy really running around, and what else does he not believe this guy did, though? He believes this guy predicted the destruction of the temple. Does he believe this guy believed he was divine? Does he believe that this guy also claimed he would die and rise again? Did he believe? What else does he discard, yet he accepts this part of the narrative? That's one of the issues I have with scholarship. It's like, damn, dude, it's tough.
Yeah, they should try to use other texts to confirm what's in the New Testament. Yeah, not use the New Testament to confirm the New Testament. The claim is not proof of the claim. Now, aside from that, the only way that I can see, the only possible way I can see an argument, a good argument about a pre-70 gospel talking about this, is if somehow it was basing it on Josephus' experience. Because he was hearing about the Jesus Ben Ananus, and he was aware of someone predicting it before the temple was destroyed. And if the gospel writers were somehow writing it before 70 AD temple destruction, they were getting it from Josephus or working with him and receiving this information like news reporting.
So you bring up a good point, and let me kind of narrow this in for the audience, including myself, because I'm slow sometimes. The only way, and this does make sense to me, that this Jesus who is woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, and all that fits this narrative, is if someone like Josephus or existed and survived the war, was a witness of what was going on with this guy named Jesus who was doing these things, and wrote it. This has nothing to do with a guy in the 30s claiming that the temple was going to be destroyed.
Exactly.
This is a guy during the war going, hey, woe to you, and et cetera, et cetera. So whoever survived that would be someone that would write something like that down, and that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's what I came up with. That's if there's an argument, if there's a good argument to exist that a pre-70 gospel existed of some kind, it must have been some kind of news reporting turned in theology.
Right.
That's all I can think of.
Well, it's definitely theological. I mean, like very theological. And then there's the mysteries. So let's go into Paul for a second, because we talked about the Gospels, I think, enough. Does Paul predict the destruction of the temple? 1 Thessalonians 4, I believe, or it's 2. In 1 Thessalonians, there seems to be what people call an interpolation. It's like God's wrath had filled up the cup. It's overflowing, and that it's coming down on them, right? It's talking about this wrath that's about to take place. You can take it how you want it. I suspect it's possible this is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. My opinion, he doesn't clearly say, hey, this is the destruction of Jerusalem, or hey, the temple's going to fall, unless I'm mistaken. If you guys know something I don't, comment it here in the comment section, or leave a comment if you're watching this live after the fact. But I ask you, do you think that Paul, and this is why I want to throw this out there, a lot of people say he doesn't talk about the temple's destruction, yet he talks about this guy named Jesus. Wouldn't that have been a very important part for Paul's Jesus, if he was a historical guy running around saying Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem, wouldn't Paul have said, hey guys, this guy who's the Messiah that they killed was saying the temple was going to be destroyed, but he was going to raise up an immortal spiritual body, spiritual temple, rather than the physical temple?
That sounds like the same story that's being said in the Gospels. The temple will be destroyed, and then a new temple will be built without hands, not being made from hands. It sounds like the same story to me.
And it could be. I mean, he does say that God does not dwell in a temple made by hands. However, is that, and remember who he's talking to here on Mars Hill, even if you took Gentiles to not mean, and this is a very, very fringe idea, but even if you meant that was a scattered diaspora of Israel, they aren't going in the temple. They don't dwell in the temple. Only the, real Israelites in Judah play around with the temple at that point in Jerusalem. These guys who are diaspora aren't really giving two hoots. They don't practice law, probably. If they do, they pick and choose. They're not going Torah Orthodox, etc. But Paul is never saying, hey, this Jesus that was crucified and said he would rise again and did rise, and if he did not rise, our entire faith is nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter if he existed or not.
But he never uses the... Why doesn't he reference the temple of this Jesus guy saying, hey, that's going to be destroyed? And our Lord and Savior said it would.
Paul's prophecy is actually some kind of copy of Jesus ben Ananus' prophecy, or something like his prophecy, but not quite. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He has a feeling something bad's going to happen to the Jews. He can't put his finger on it. So that's why he's writing it like that.
Could be. I mean, we're speculating, and everybody watching, we're speculating. Dude, I will stand corrected all day. I just like to test it, mental gymnastics. I'm going to have guys on here who are going to be historicists, and they're going to take a position that you may not. So just be mindful of that. We're going to have...
I think one of the things that we've said here is fact. Definitely fact. Is that all based on the evidence? The only guy that's called Jesus that we know definitely is predicting this thing is Jesus ben Ananus. That's it. We don't got anybody else with that name doing that.
What details do we have about him other than the fact that he was saying woe to this? Is he old? Do they give us an age? Do they tell us anything about him?
Not really. No.
Okay.
They just say he's just some guy running around. And when the Jews took him up to Albinus, turned him into Albinus, pronounced him a maniac and let him go. And then does his thing for I believe it was 7 more years, and then he died in AD 70 when the temple was under siege.
So when was he under Albinus? What year was this?
AD 63.
So this
7 years later.
This is right around the time when stuff's about to hit the fan.
Right.
In 65 or 66, I believe it is, the fan has been hit, period. I mean, that's when the legions were attacked. If I'm not mistaken, it was 64 or 66?
66.
Okay. So this guy was doing this prior to these Jews that attacked the legions in Rome and really caused self-destruction to take place. So 3 years prior to that, this guy's running around saying, woe to you. And he's doing this in the Jerusalem temple?
Yeah, let me read this. So, Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3. But a further portent was even more alarming. 4 years before the war, when the city was enjoying profound peace and prosperity, there came to the feast, at which it is custom of all Jews to erect tabernacles to God. One Jesus, son of Ananus, a rude peasant, who suddenly began to cry out, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, kind of like the four kingdoms in the Old Testament, a voice against Jerusalem and the sanctuary, a voice against the bridegroom and the bride, a voice against all the people. Day and night he went about all the alleys with his cry on his lips. Some of the leading citizens, incensed at these ill-omened words, arrested the fellow and severely chastised him, but he without a word on his own behalf, or for the private ear of those who smote him, only continued his cries as before. Thereupon the magistrates, supposing, as he was indeed the case, that the man was under some supernatural impulse, brought him before the Roman governor, where, although flayed to the bone with scourges, he neither sued for mercy nor shed a tear, but without introducing the most mournful variations into his utterances, responded to each lashing with "Woe to Jerusalem." When Albinus the governor asked him who and whence he was and why he uttered these cries, he answered him never a word, but unceasingly, reiterated his dirge over the city, until Albinus pronounced him a maniac and let him go, like the Barabbas release. During the whole period up to the outbreak of war, he neither approached nor was seen talking to any of these citizens, but daily, like a prayer that he had toned, repeated his lament, "Woe to Jerusalem!" He never cursed any of those who beat him from day to day, nor blessed those who offered him food. To all men that melancholically presage with his own reply, his cries were loudest at the festivals. So for 7 years and 5 months, like I mentioned earlier, he continued his wail.
Mm-hmm.
His voice never flagging, nor his strength exhausted until in the siege, having seen his presage verified, he found his rest. For while going as around and shouting in piercing tones on the wall, "Woe once more to the city and to the people and to the temple," as he added a last word, "and woe to me also," a stone hurled from the ballista struck and killed him on the spot.
Okay, you got to stop for 1 second. Okay, there's too much going on here for this to sound accurate, historically accurate. It sounds like the same thing where Jesus goes off into the wilderness, is tempted by the devil, and somehow everybody knows the narrative of what's being said between these two guys. Christians will tell you, oh, well, Jesus came back and he said, hey, this is what just happened. This is what the devil said. This is what I said. Then the devil said this back. Then I said to the devil. Then the devil said again to me, and I told the devil off. And sure enough, I did the right thing. Write that down and make sure you guys don't forget it. That sounded a little too like, and then woe to me, and then the catapult ends the book. It's like,
yeah, bam.
It sounds very suspicious to me. Even the idea that he's describing him being lashed, like he didn't cry, he didn't even make an emotion. This guy's getting whipped to the bone, yet he's somehow like taking it and he's like, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees!" Like, dude, this guy is. It just seems a little suspicious to being really literally accurate. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I agree. I'm sure there's some bits of that isn't historically accurate, especially the parts that claim that they know what he said. Unless the only chance of that happening is Josephus uh, got to know Albinus and Albinus told him, or somebody there told him.
I mean,
possibly. I don't know. I don't know. That's the only way I can think of it be accurate.
Dude, this is crazy, man. I enjoy this stuff. It's just even the source that's supposed to be, what we're relying on sounds to me
odd.
It just sounds to me a little bit weird, like
yeah.
I don't know, man. It just sounds very fictional in a way. I mean, there could be truth to it, but even that seems built up.
He never does this. He never has any of this being said about King Bazus. King Bazus is the one that's on the, like, his story is on the secular corner. And Josephus is never trying to exaggerate his story in any kind of way. It's, mythologically speaking, divine speaking, and never claims that he's predicting anything. But he's talking about the other Jesuses.
Right.
And when, to the gospel writers, to them it's like, okay, this is good. We can take advantage of that, mix them up together,
right.
Mix their personalities up. And King Bazus, his family was usually pro-Roman, and they don't have any issues with Rome. And King Bazus is, of course, a king, just like Jesus is called king in the Gospels now. And
Okay, let me poke there. King Bazus, okay? Herod
yeah,
plays a huge role in one of the gospel narratives trying to go after
right.
the newborn son. Does
Hmm.
Herod play any role with King Bazus? Is there any connection between him and his family and the Herods?
Well, his birth doesn't look like it happened in the early first century A.D. It looks like it happened. Well, I need to do a whole show about this on with you. I need to continue the story of King Bazus because I got a lot of new information coming out about this. It looks like he was born into the first century BC, and like I talked about before, the Bereshith Rabbah, which was part of the series of books called the Midrash Rabbah, says that Izates, King Bazus' father, is the son of a Ptolemy. Now, here's what's interesting: Ptolemy was killed in 40 BC by the Persians during an attack on Jerusalem.
Right.
Now, what I found interesting about this is Herod is actually ruling at this time, and and we did hear about Herod and his family massacre that happens later. Could easily have been a blending of the two stories, resulting in a Bazus or a Isus coming out of Bazus a bit, having the same story as the fleeing to Judea. Because what did the family of Izates do after Ptolemy's death? They later fled to the kingdom of Adiabeni, which is in the region of Iraq.
Okay, I don't want to get too lost into that, but I do want to mention, in light of you're trying to find characters that play a role, and I respect that because we're doing the same thing with who this guy is who's saying the temple's supposed to fall during the war, at least prior to the war and right up to the war. Like in 63 up to 70, this guy supposedly woe to you, etc., etc. Um,
Right.
my issues is we start going back into the 30s under Pontius Pilate. We got some red flags. We go back into the 30s or 20s or when was it? Earliest first century with Herod. Okay, once again
Right.
they're trying to place this thing around this time. Why would they do that? Why would they go back to Herod? Who is this King Bazus to Herod at that point? Because you're going back to the very beginning of the first century at that point. You see what I mean? I know you said he
Right.
was born, what, 1
Well,
BC or something?
Bazus?
Yeah.
No, we're talking about around 4038 BC.
Okay, born.
Yeah.
So he
So
really in history takes place.
that's
Okay.
yeah, because that's because the dating of the death of his grandfather. Now, King Bazus died of old age according to Josephus, so he was alive for a while in AD 31.
Okay.
So there's that. Aside from that, Herod plays an important role because this is where Judas the Galilean story kind of gets blended here. The Judases that we see in Josephus' text, because in about 5 BC we have the someone called Judas son of Sephorius and an accomplice Matthias take down the golden eagle from the temple.
Hmm.
Herod has them arrested. He then has Matthias and his followers burned alive in 5 BC. But in 4 BC, when he dies, Judas is released. This is another situation that's kind of like the Barabbas release.
Okay.
And now, there's an argument about Judas the Galilean being Judas son of Sephorius. I don't, at this time, I don't completely agree with that. Judas the Galilean in AD 6 does his little tax revolt, kind of like Jesus. Turns the tables of the tax collectors in the Gospel of Luke. Now, if we look at the other text that the church fathers got into, the text of the Gnostics, about talking about Judas was the one that was crucified, not a Jesus. That actually makes sense because King Bazus dying of old age makes sense. Why would they crucify a pro-Roman king? That makes no sense. But anti-Roman rebel, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Yet the Gospels wants us to think it's the other way around. They released the rebel, Barabbas, crucify the pacifist. That makes no sense.
Hmm.
It has to be the other way around. And if it's the other way around, that would make sense. Certainly with someone called Judas being crucified. And Judas the Galilean is the leader of the Sicarii, just like Judas is called Iscariot. And the funny thing is, both Judas Iscariot and Jesus in the book of Acts, that is, actually is hung on a tree. The book of Acts says he was hung on a tree.
Hmm.
Judas Iscariot is also hung on a tree.
That is true. And then his bowels fell into the field, and
Right.
okay,
Yeah, it
right.
says right here, Acts chapter 5, verse 30. It says, the God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree.
This is interesting, Jacob. Okay, anyone who's watching this, write your comment, questions, whatever down below. Make sure you guys hit that like button before you guys leave this live here, and hit the subscribe and the bell if you haven't. Jacob, we've got to do another show, another follow-up. This was a good a good tester live, man. We're gonna get your audio right next time we're on, but at least it worked, and we just let it ride. I tried for a couple.
Good. Yeah, it was good enough today for tonight.
Yeah. So with everybody who's in here, I really appreciate you guys sticking around, checking out the show. MythVision's growing, all thanks to you and bringing in new ideas. So don't forget to write me if you need to. I'm on Facebook. You guys can just add me there. Give me any questions you have. You guys can shoot ideas my way. I'm going to have a bunch of different types of guests come on. You may not agree with all of them. But with that being said, we're going to end this podcast, this show right here. And I do plan, I'm letting our audience know, I plan on getting MythVision Podcast onto Spotify as well as iTunes and other platforms. You do notice I do put ad rolls on my videos, a lot of them. Every 8 or 9 minutes, I'll add an ad roll on my videos that I do with these guests. I pay out of pocket to have these scholars come on, like Dr. Bob. I donate out of pocket to pay these scholars to come and join me on the show. So all these shows you see are coming out of my pocket. The only way I get reimbursement is through the advertising on YouTube. So eventually, hopefully, there's some type of crowdfunding where I'm able to go on iTunes and Spotify, and you guys don't have to listen to the ad breaks, but I'm trying to get to that point. We're small right now. So I appreciate all the love you guys have given. Even if we don't agree with things, we're just testing these ideas. But I can tell you the last thing I personally accept is what the text says and buying it the way that it's written. I don't buy it. I've left that box, but I don't disrespect anyone who does. I have my own hunch and reasons. Jacob, do you want to close us out, brother? You have something you'd like to say to the audience?
Sure. In the end, it looks like the gospel writers used Josephus as their primary source of information. And what they did was they combined different events throughout the first century. It's like the New Testament is like a screwed up history book about the first century AD. And it may have been about some kind of news reporting turned into theology regarding Jesus ben Ananus, this prophecy about the 70 temple going down in AD 70. It may have been that if there was a pre-AD 70 gospel of some kind that was originally some kind of news reporting. Who knows? But at the end of the day, I'm pretty convinced it seems to be a screwed up history of the beginning to the near the end of the first century AD.
Purposeful, mythologized history.
Yes.
I think that would be a better way than saying news, because when we think news, we think modern context of what is news other than it reports something that's happening. But from the ancient standpoint, I think the ancients had the divine mixed in. The ancients couldn't separate those.
I understand. I don't even myself agree that there was that was news reporting. I only mentioned that. The only reason I said that is if there was a pre-gospel, pre-AD 70 gospel. That's the only way I can think something like that is possible if something like that existed. But it's most likely not, and it should be after AD 70. The evidence seems to lean towards a post-AD 70 gospel.
I totally agree with you, brother. I think that's most scholars who are taking this approach, who aren't trying to appeal to their fellow Christian brothers and sisters, and I get it. Trust me, I don't try to go out and split hairs with believers whatsoever. I found a little corner, and I called it MythVision Podcast. This is my little corner. If you don't like it, you know what I mean? And if you can handle the discussion and you just disagree, cool. But at the end of the day, dude, I love everybody. I help people in the field of addiction. And let me tell you, addiction is a field where most people are religious. And so dealing with that 24/7 with people who come to me who the Holy Spirit and Jesus and this and that, that's a common thing for me. And I understand it. A lot of people hold on to this stuff for hope, but I'm coming at this. I go to the scholars. I'm looking to them. I wish we could have Bart Ehrman on our show one day. and I'd like to pick at it. All right, Dr. Ehrman, I've got some issues I'd like for you to answer, and I would like to be able to actually pick at his theory and really wrap my head around it prior to coming at him with it. But I would love to see how he responds, or at least get another scholar who is on par with him, discuss these matters with him. Not necessarily a debate. I'm not a big fan of debates. I'm more a fan of discussions, because at the end of the day, you're not losing your soul and I'm not losing mine for thinking this way. You see what I mean? It's why can't we just...
It would certainly be interesting to have Ehrman come on here and have this conversation. That would be very interesting.
I agree, man. Hey, you guys, if you see that PayPal thing up there, you guys are more than welcome to show some love. Of course, I always appreciate it. This is how I get Dr. Bob and other people on. And a couple of you who've sent me 5 here and 5 there, I really appreciate the love. I give that to the scholars. So we'll close out on that, man. And I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to make a prediction right now. And then, guys, you got to write a gospel about me after the fact, okay? Make sure. The prediction is I'm going to live till I'm 89 years old. All right, that's the prediction. Just remember that when this is through the sound waves in a long time from now, okay? This is 89 years old. That's how long I'm going to be living alive. And if I'm correct, then know that I was the Son of God. MythVision Podcast. Love you guys. All right, Jacob. Love you, man. Thanks for joining me, brother. Let's do another one soon. This was fun.
Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for all you watching. Hit that like button. All right, let's do this. Close out. If I figure out how to use this thing.